Hi guys, welcome back to Gathering Crows. This is Nathara from Crowsong Lodge, and today we have quite a bit to go over. I've been working for a couple months now on kind of sifting out the Christian basis for our society and the way that informs just the way we interact with reality, the basic assumptions that we make, and how living in a predominantly Christian culture really shapes your whole view of reality. And I call this the Christian default. Now, I'm going to break up this topic into a few different episodes, probably, because one of the things that I got really stuck on with this was doing the research. There's a lot of material out there, and it addresses so many different aspects of Christianity and the way it informs society. So for this particular episode, I am just going to throw out some kind of philosophical ideas, some subjective, more opinion-based things, different beliefs that people have, and the ones that we're kind of fed. And these are the ones that I feel like really, when you're trying to decide your own personal beliefs and philosophies, I feel like these are questions that are really important to ask. These are not all the questions that are important to ask, but they're just some of the ones that I find exist in our basic assumptions of how the world works and the way that it needs to work. I'm also going to point out that I do not have an issue with Christians. I think it's a neutral quality is what I feel like. Like there are, really good Christians out there and there are really shitty Christians out there. And just like there's really good pagans out there and there's really shitty pagans out there. So I feel like this is not intended to be a condemnation of Christianity, but more a reflection of the way it informs the default assumptions that we make about society, about ourselves, about the nature of reality, and those kinds of things. And I'm not going to go on about what the correct answer is for any of these questions because I'm not sure there is a correct answer. But I do feel like these are good questions to ask ourselves, to sit down and think, oh, these are the assumptions that I have been making. Do I actually agree with them or not? Do they feel right to me? Is that the kind of life I want to live? And so that's the purpose of this podcast. So here we're just going to have a more abstract, off-the-cuff, philosophical discussion. And in further episodes, we're going to start talking about research. In the notes for this podcast, you are going to find some references to different threads and articles you might find useful. I feel like this is an important discussion to be having right now, considering the political state of America in particular. But I see that like also Australia and the UK and other countries are kind of dealing with this struggle as well. So it would not be a bad time to start asking some of these questions. I think the big thing that we need to discuss when it comes to questioning the default Christian beliefs that we're given is the very nature of whether or not good and evil exist. Again, I'm not going to tell you if good and evil exist, but we're kind of presented with this idea, and you can see it not just in the way people discuss reality, but also in our media, our movies and our books and these kinds of things. We love to have media that has a clear hero or good guy, and we love to have a clear villain. It is very hard for us to kind of discuss and wrap our brains around media that focuses or highlights the immoral or unethical aspects of society without assigning that blame to a particular villain. And I think that this is one of the reasons that, for instance, the recent Korean movies that have become popular, like Parasite and then Squid Game just came out a little bit ago, are often misunderstood and misinterpreted because there isn't a very clear villain who is wholly responsible for all the harm done in the plot lines of those media, so much as it is a kind of a commentary on modern society. And I think that just looking at society and the various systems we have as places being an issue unto themselves is kind of hard for us to wrap our brains around. So good versus evil, God versus Satan, that is a hard one. Iron Man versus Thanos. We like those good versus evil stories, and we love to see the villain get their comeuppance. We love to see them lose in the end. We like to see that our heroes are full of virtue and virtue itself is defined by Christian standards. And we really love these stories and we're saturated with them completely. So I think that is a good place to start. Like look around and look within and test what your feelings are about, like whether or not good exists, whether or not evil exists, whether or not they are black and white attributes that people have. Like, is an action always good every time you take it, or is an action always evil every time you take it, or is there context and nuance? And are you trying to define good and evil as like healthy versus unhealthy, or is it just kind of an arbitrary value judgment that you've kind of been conditioned to think about? So I think that is a huge one that we need to think about when it comes to examining the Christian default in society. Another one is focus on productivity or wealth, material success, as an indicator of virtue and worthiness. So we tend to feel in society that if you are a poor person, then you must have some kind of inherent sin, some part of you that is not optimal, that is not preferred. So maybe you're lazy, maybe you're just poor, maybe you have had a hard time finding a good job that covers all of your bills, and now you have to live with 6 different roommates. But on the other hand, if you manage to be a CEO of a company, even if you got there through nepotism, and by nepotism I mean like you inherited the company from your parent, then you're inherently viewed as being more worthy, more virtuous, more right, more of an expert than someone who may have more schooling or experience, but not quite the same monetary markers of success that someone who's rich is. Now, to get real specific about that, because I'm sure that sounded like super fucking abstract, you gotta look at like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos and those guys and see how we very much treat them as if they are more worthy, more intelligent, more virtuous, more upstanding, more important in society than people who might be just like a gas station checker or a janitor or a fast food burger flipper. We just naturally as a society hold people who have more money up as if they were more important, more virtuous, and more worthwhile than the other people around them. And that, I feel like, definitely needs to be questioned. And health is a factor in there as well. There is a strong feeling and undercurrent, especially if you pay attention to how we treat disabled people in society, about health and wellness as a reflection of virtue. If you are a good person, then you don't need to worry about getting sick. Or if you do get sick, it's going to be pretty minor. But if you are unhealthy, if you have some kind of chronic condition, if you have some kind of permanent setback in regards to how society places value, then you are inherently worth less than somebody who has a good, high-paying job and a lot of money in the bank. And that's how we treat people. Like, if you aren't working, if you aren't able to prove that you're making X number of dollars an hour, then we really don't think you deserve basic human rights. And this is a struggle that, and I absolutely recommend that you follow the disability activist community if you aren't already, or at least take a peek at it and see what's going on. But this is something that disabled people deal with a lot, is just inherently being found less worthy of the things that bring us joy in life. People who are sick deserve it somehow, and they deserve to be miserable until they make whatever amends are felt as necessary. We also, oddly, view pleasure as sinful. If you are somebody who is here in life and you don't have big, giant money goals, if your goal in life is to like live that cottagecore aesthetic because that's something that you love and it brings you pleasure, whether that pleasure is physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, or whatever, if you're focused on that pleasure and just kind of loving life, then that is viewed as sinful. That is viewed as selfish. But if your goals in life involve, having a lot of money and having a giant company and getting your stockholders paid, then that is considered much more of a virtue than wanting to have that physical pleasure, even though we know that rich people have a lot more access to pleasure and is the thing that they mostly go after. And we also intend to feel that people who are accomplished financially in life are more entitled to those pleasures as a reward for all their good deeds and hard work ethic, and not despite how much they might actually be working. So philanthropy is very low on rich people's list of priorities, whereas pleasure and luxury and accommodation are very high. However, if you were to say out loud that, I just really want everything in my life to be sumptuous continuous and delicious every moment of every day, that is kind of damning. So think about pleasure as sinful and hard work or sacrifice as virtue, because that feels to me like it needs to be questioned. We also tend to elevate the intellectual qualities and accomplishments over anything that is instinctual or physical. And so sorry, I always sound so abstract when I say these, but what I'm talking about here is that we absolutely feel that our brains need to be in control of our body. That whatever instincts, whatever primal reactions that we have, whatever emotional response we have to things going on around us needs to be controlled and restrained, denied, trained out of us for the sake of some kind of intellectual, even calm, reasoned out, rational response to a situation. And yeah, so that is definitely something to be considered as well. I'm trying not to put a whole lot of bias in here, but I don't think that's going to be possible, you guys. So just hang in there and I'll do my best. We also view ourselves as humans, as a human species, as being separate from nature. We are above cats. We are separate from trees. We are put in our own little spaces that we create. And you can see this kind of reflected in the way we treat the difference between cities and people who live in more rural areas. Cities are more sophisticated, they're more refined, they're more developed, and rural areas tend to be more organic and more natural and more unrefined and a little bit more rough. And so we really kind of we put different values on those things. We prefer cities. Cities are better, they're cleaner, they're more productive, they're whatever. Whereas if you live somewhere rural, then you're probably not a great person. At best, you're innocent and uneducated, and at worst, you're just a filthy rural bumpkin. So that is also something to consider. And as part of that as well, even though we elevate the intellectual so much more over the instinctual and the physical, we also elevate the spiritual. So if you can justify your motivations in some kind of rational sounding way, it doesn't actually have to be rational, it just has to be rational sounding. People have to find it believable for whatever reason, or in the context of spirituality or spiritual virtue, then those reasonings are highly valued than simple physical needs or physical pleasure, comfort in your environment, those kind of things. So, and we see that too a lot in the spiritual pagan New Age community as well, where we really want to focus on separating our spirit from our physical bodies. And that's where people say things like, we are just a spirit having a physical experience, instead of identifying also with our physical bodies and our physical natures. We kind of elevate and cause our perceptions of ourselves and other people to be more focused on the spiritual aspects and denying those physical aspects, which gets very complicated when you think about how your spirituality, your goodness, your virtue is supposed to inform the physical well-being of your body. So if you are a good person, then you are spiritual and connected to the divine and blah, blah, blah. And that will be reflected in the health and attractiveness of your physical existence as well. So there's no point in actually paying attention to your physical existence or prioritizing it in any way. There's a lot going on where we really devalue physical wants and needs, which is really hard to do because physical needs are needs. And so we should probably prioritize them. That is absolutely my opinion, but you guys think about it for yourselves and see where you land on that. Another thing that is really baked in, and I think this has become extremely apparent the last, 5-10 years in our politics and legislations and things like that. We really feel and act like if someone is more devoutly religious, then they are inherently more moral and ethical and should be given more responsibility for other people around them and their environment than somebody who is less spiritual. As an example, there are a lot of political ads and commercials that emphasize how much faith a politician or administrator has and how very Christian they are versus someone who might be more secularly motivated or who even might have an atheist. There's a lot of jokes that go around that say that someone who is atheist or who does not disclose their faith at all has a distinct disadvantage when it comes to politics and leadership roles in society than somebody who is very open and even braggadocious about their Christian faith. And when you get down to the more denigrated faiths, and here I'm talking primarily about people who are like Buddhist or especially Muslim, that becomes almost a damnation. Like, they may have really solid morals and ethics, and they may have a very strong faith, but it's the wrong kind of faith. And pagans will absolutely be subject to this too, even though it's not going to be as harsh as someone who is Muslim, for example. So just the assumption that somebody who has faith in any religion is going to be more moral than somebody who doesn't have any kind of faith or religion is an issue. But then on top of that, you have like a hierarchy of faiths and faith paths that are more moral than others as well. So that is something that one should really think about, especially the interaction between religious faith and morals and ethics. And the definition of morals and ethics that I'm working off of here, basically that morals are informed by religion and faith and spirituality, and ethics are more informed by rationality and secular thought. That's my understanding of those two words. If you have a different one, or if you know something more exact and precise, please put a comment somewhere or send me a message or something. Because of this assumption that having Christian faith especially leads to better morals and better ethics, we also feel that those Christians out there make for better leaders and politicians. And so even in a workplace where a lot of us in various states here in the U.S. have protections, legal protections about having to disclose our faith or our lack of faith, that is going to end up hindering us in our career advancement, which is kind of a bummer. So it's important to analyze whether or not being a Christian actually makes you a better person or better capable of doing your job than not being Christian. Now, there are some fields where this is different, especially in like science or maths. Those fields tend to be much more in favor of ration and reason amongst themselves, where being Christian or pagan or Jewish or whatever is going to be seen as more of a character flaw. But in those same positions, when you approach the general public, then you really have to downplay that lack of faith, or people disregard the information that you're giving them. So moving on to another topic, we have the whole idea of what is polite and courteous behavior, the things that you should be able to do in public and the things that you need to keep in your own home, if you even should be doing them at all. And the concept of not suitable for work is entirely defined by Christian values. And I say entirely because, you know, the things that are not suitable for work are going to be your sex and sometimes violence. We're a lot more flexible on the violence aspect, but also swear words. Like the whole, I should probably not get started on swear words, but also we're going to tie this into what is okay to say around children. Oh, think of the children. So one of the big things that jumps out to me is that we often are not willing to discuss biological processes, or even up to and especially including death with children. And I can get that. I get that. Like, we kind of don't want to bum them out, you know, trying to raise kids in a way that kind of seems very doomy is maybe not your ideal, but also the fact that, you know, hardship and struggle and death and illness are even considered to be so discouraging and disheartening is a problem unto itself, and a very kind of Christian viewpoint. And we're not even supposed to talk about death and dying with each other. That's, you know, not polite conversation to have around people. And the way that we handle death and dying and grief in Western culture is actually super unhealthy now. And we need to have those conversations before we're already in the middle of it. Now let's talk about the very nature of reality. Is reality even intentional? The fact that there is a reality, did someone create that? And if they did, is there a reason for why it was created? And we're all familiar with like the Christian genesis of reality, you know, first there was darkness and then God said let there be light. And so the very nature of reality, that there was some intentional creation of reality, that there is a fundamental purpose in reality, that there's a fundamental purpose in life, that the world is not just a weird happenstance of chaos and chemicals, is kind of a fundamental Christian belief. There's a lot of faiths out there, but most of your pantheons are, your ancient pantheons kind of view the world as it just kind of came into being through random circumstance, a side effect of some other kind of hero mythology that was happening between gods, or even that the gods came after the creation of the universe and reality and whatever you want to call it. So the whole idea that reality was intentionally designed and humans are here for a specific reason, that we had a hands-on creator, that we are the fruit of someone's efforts, is a very Christian concept in itself and is not found in every other culture. It is found in some other cultures, but not every, not even most, really. And so just questioning the whole, like, what is reality thing? Is there an objective reality? Is there a right or wrong? Is there a reason why we're born? Is there a reason why humans even exist? What are we supposed to accomplish in life? What is the purpose of life? What should we be aiming to achieve with our existence? And is there some kind of great ineffable plan out there that is dictating what is happening and kind of informing our actions, and the reactions people have to our actions is a very Christian concept that's kind of baked into Western society at this point. And I absolutely feel like it should be questioned. I don't really have much investment in the answers that anyone comes up with. I just want them to ask that question and kind of investigate the concept and ideas around it. Reality is a really big question, and I could probably make like an hour and a half long podcast just talking about the nature of reality and all the questions that you can come up with and the different ways you can interface with it. But I'm not going to do that now because I'm talking about something else. And we only have a limited amount of time, and this is already getting long. So then we start talking about some more Christian-specific morals and values. So when it comes to things like forgiveness, is it a virtue? Are you a better person because you're better able or more quick to forgive the people around you? And if someone is sincerely sorry and they do a picture-perfect apology and amend their behaviors, are we really obligated to forgive them despite whatever it is that they may have done? And I think that is a very Christian value that we have in our society, because we are definitely taught, not just through like our parents and what we're told directly, but like through media and things like that, that forgiveness is holy, it's divine, it's ethical and moral and right, and also an obligation that you owe to people and institutions that may have done you wrong. And so questioning forgiveness and how and when it should apply and what obligation there is around it is really important. Likewise, when it comes to suffering and offense, we're encouraged to turn the other cheek. And in the biblical concept of this is very much like, if you get slapped in the face, then you should turn the other cheek and allow that person to commit the same offense again. It's basically just kind of ignoring or moving past or being separate from the hurts that you are dealt from other people or circumstances or situations, instead of feeling anger or resentment or resolve around them. And so turning the other cheek is one of those things that is very interesting to see how we are taught it in society and what feelings we end up having around it. I really love looking at secular media to see how much of these values are inherent in the stories that we tell each other, even if we don't frame them in a religious context. You know, so I'm talking about things like Avengers movies or your basic comedies and rom-coms and things like that. You see kind of this value judgment in the way we frame those stories and how we talk about the characters in those stories, and I think this is one of the more fun aspects of media analysis out there. So this may be more apparent if you think of all the times that a character has told another character to just leave something alone. Don't stoop to that person's level. We're better than that. Come on, let's just get out of here. That kind of stuff. And of course, I think that you'll find the most explicit and obvious examples of this kind of stuff happens in horror movies. If we look at our justice system, prisons and jails and bail and rescinding people's rights and things like that, then we really are dealing with the whole concept of when you sin or commit some kind of social transgression, then you need to be punished. And this is especially fascinating to me because we have that whole obligatory forgiveness message that we receive through society and the whole turn the other cheek thing, but then we also have hell and damnation and punishing the sinner. So it's a little bit inconsistent, but it's still all very Christian. And we have a lot of studies out there that show that punishment neither fixes nor deters crimes. So why do we punish people? What are we hoping to achieve? Where does that value and compulsion come from, especially in the terms of justice? Like, what really would benefit society the most when it comes to these social transgressions? Because I think we can all kind of agree in a more objective and non-spiritual way, just with our basic ethics and reasoning, that murdering people is unpreferable. And I say unpreferable because I'm pretty sure we can all come up with some scenario that fully justifies a murder. But generally speaking, it is not preferable and not encouraged. And so where do we get this idea that punishment needs to happen, the flavor of punishment, how enduring that punishment needs to be, and what kind of results we expect from that punishment, and why punishment instead of something else? Why punishment instead of supports? Why punishment instead of amends? Those kinds of questions. Like, punishment is a really big thing. And I put it here on this list. I'm going to link for you guys an article that a journalist that I follow wrote about corporal punishment and children, especially as treated in the evangelical sphere of Christianity, because this is where I think the whole punishment as justice concept really breaks down when we're dealing with children, when we're teaching children, when we're raising them. So that is definitely something that I think would really be beneficial if people sat with and thought about and researched and kind of came to a resolution in themselves, just how we even deal with justice. And you see this bleed over into the spiritual and New Age community when people talk about karma. When people talk about karma in these communities, it is very, very separate from the Buddhist concept of karma, which is where we appropriated that from. And we tend to think that, like, karma's a bitch and she's going to get you if you do something bad. But really, in the original faith, karma was more of an encouragement to have no effect on physical reality around you. So you neither wanted bad karma nor good karma, because that karma would just weigh you down and keep you tied to the physical plane. And so it's very interesting to see how these values that we learn from Christianity absolutely gets recreated and rewritten for the spiritual New Age pagan communities. And speaking of, punishment and justice, let's talk about the whole way we treat judgment in society as well. We have this whole social value where we shouldn't be judging other people. Try walking a mile in someone else's shoes before you judge them. Judgment is often treated exactly the same way as bias, all your favorite isms and phobias. Judgment is seen as a very irrational, subjective, and harsh behavior and practice to have. It is considered to be holier than thou behavior. But exactly where do we draw the line between what is judgment and what is discernment? Because there's absolutely a role that judgment needs to play in society, and it can be as simple as, is experimenting with this unknown mushroom a good idea or a deadly idea? Like, you have to use your judgment to decide whether or not you're going to proceed forward on that. So this stigma and bias and association with judgment as a harsh and mean thing, and something that we want to kind of learn not to do, or at least reserve it for the people that we feel are better than most people in some kind of moral and ethical way, I feel like needs to be questioned. And since I'm getting my bias all over here, I feel like it's also very contextual. So taking that a step further and trying to decide what contexts change the way you feel about judgment is probably important as well. The whole idea of having one true way of doing things, I feel, is very strongly a Christian concept baked into Western society. And again, I'm focusing on Western society here because that's the one I'm familiar with. I'm also aware that Western society and Eastern society have issues as terms go, but I just don't know better ones. So if you have better suggestions for how to differentiate that, that would be super cool. So the whole idea of there being one true way, I've said this across several different podcasts and videos and stuff, but what I mean by one true way is that there is one and only one correct way to live your life. There's one and only one correct way to interface with reality and to interact with other people. That there is always going to be one way that is more correct and more perfect than any of the other ways, even if other ways are also viewed as valuable. So we see this when it comes to we're all here, and the dream, the American dream in specific, is to do well in school, go on to college, get married, settle down, buy a house with a white picket fence, have 2.5 kids, eventually retire at 65, and then lead a quiet and uneventful death. So a lot of us aren't really able to do that kind of stuff anymore, that whole one true path of American success. But the whole idea that there is one perfect method to achieving things, that there's one perfect method of living your life, and maybe other methods can work out, but they're not preferable, that we're going to judge them and devalue them, is very much a Christian concept. And the part where I run into it a lot is when we run into, in the spiritual and New Age community, we see a lot of thou shalt nots and thou musts. So we find that when we hear people saying that, love and light, positive vibes only, no cursing allowed, and the whole thing where we argue about what makes someone a real witch or a real light worker. I was talking with someone on the internet the other day. When I was in high school in the 90s, the Wiccan party line was very much like, we don't believe in Satan, we don't think he exists, and you don't curse people, you don't cast love spells. In fact, you don't cast spells at all. It's just totally a religious experience. And that was kind of the ideal Wiccan stance. And so that we have so many of these paths and situations and teachers and ideas out there, that there is a way to be a perfect American citizen, or there is a way to be a perfect pagan or a perfect witch, and all the other methods are substandard and not preferred, shows this kind of valuation on the one true way. Also, as an aside, fuck perfect. Other ways might sort of work for you now, but they're not going to work for you in the best and most spiritual, fulfilling, way possible. And I think that needs to be questioned quite a lot. So, on the nature of gods. And this one kind of has become more and more forceful and obvious over the last couple decades. But it's the idea that gods in general are perfect and all-knowing, omnipresent and omnipotent, moral and righteous, and also very interactive, a lot of influence on reality. So we see this especially with the Christian God, the perfect template, right? So the Christian God is all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere, ineffable. But we also see people who have a more spiritual nature treating their gods this way. So I've heard the same arguments for Hecate being all-present, all-knowing, and perfect, which is really weird. I'm using Hecate as an example here, but it's all the ancient pantheons are treated that way, really. But acting like the gods cannot make a mistake, that they also hold one singular, all-pervasive truth. And instead, if you look at myths, if you look at the Norse myths, or you look at the Greek myths, the gods are making mistakes all the time. They are fooling each other all the time. They are getting fooled by humans all the time. They make mistakes and they make amends sometimes, not always. But the gods in ancient pantheons are very, very fallible. And I specifically mention, the Greek pantheons and the North pantheons, because those are the ones I'm most familiar with. But you also are going to find this in Egyptian pantheons. You're going to find this in indigenous cultures' pantheons as well. Especially when you have any pantheon with a trickster god can only really exist among the gods if the gods are fallible in some way. They've got to be able to be tricked, right? So the whole idea that gods are all-knowing, perfect, omnipresent, which just means they're everywhere at the same time, that you could kind of dial in prayer or spell-wise or ritual-wise, and that God is always going to be available, that they know everyone's everything. They know how you live your life, what truths are in your heart, what opinions you carry, those kinds of things. That is all a very much a Christian ideal. That is what the Christian Bible teaches, and it's kind of overflowed into the way the pagan community interacts with their gods as well. So this is getting really long long at this point. I'm going to stop here. I hope I've given y'all a lot to think about, a lot of things to consider. Again, I don't feel there's any particular right answer, any true answer to any of these questions. I do get a little flustered at how we allow a lot of these assumptions to dictate our laws, ethics, storytelling, that kind of stuff, the values and the judgments we place on each other. But I don't think there's any true answer to any of these questions. And I think that a great answer to a lot of these questions is like, I don't know, man, I'm waiting to find out. But like sitting with these questions and even recognizing the fact that they're questions is really, really important. Again, this is going to be a multi-part series. Probably not going to do them all in a row because I need to break shit up too. But I think these are really important questions to ask. They're not all the questions that are out there to ask, but they're a good place to get started. And it's a good place to start determining where your morals and ethics come from and how you're viewing other people. And if you actually agree with the way those inherent beliefs reflect on your behaviors and the way you live your life. Just asking the questions matters so much. So I hope that you've found this helpful. I would love to hear what you think always. I'm gonna put that link about child discipline in the evangelical church in the comments below, whatever. I don't know where you guys listen to my podcast at, but it'll be somewhere in comments, and hopefully you'll see that on whatever platform you're listening to. And we'll be back again to talk about the way that Christianity has kind of structured and determined the way we participate in society. Again, this is Nathara from Crowsong Lodge. This is the Gathering Crows podcast, and I will talk to you guys next time. I hope you have a wonderful spooky season, however you decide to celebrate that, and move into a beautiful and lovely November. Be well out there.